Everyone, I'd like to welcome everyone to the special meeting of the City of Nacogdoches, August 8th, 2023. Kathleen, would you lead us in prayer, please?
I'd be happy to. First of all, we want to say hello to Larissa's mother, Celia, who is watching today. Larissa Philpott Brown has worked hard on what we're going to see today. Dear Lord, thank you for our beautiful city, for all of our business partners and their families, for all of our citizens. Thank you for our city's administration and staff, for all who work so hard to keep our city working and safe in this heat. Please continue to watch over us, to protect us, to guide us. We ask a special blessing today for Mabel Alexandra Quigley being born today, her mother Lily, and her grandfather, Councilman Brad Mall. And Lord, as always, give us wisdom, and we could really use rain. We ask all of these things in the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen.
Amen. Stand for the pledge, please.
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. On the Texas flag, I pledge allegiance to be Texas, one state, under God, one and indivisible.
I'd like to say Mr. Bolden is here virtually, and Mr. Mall is having his daughter's having his first grandchild today, so he's in the Denton area. First item, we'll ask for anybody have anything on open forum that they'd like to discuss. Okay, there being none. Okay, we're going to go into executive session fairly quickly, and we'll be in deliberation regarding economic development negotiations under Government Section Code 551. And pursuant to Texas Government Code Section 551, we will go into executive session, and it is 11:02. We'll be back shortly. We are back in regular session at 11:10. And pursuant to Texas Government Code Section 551.087.
Mayor, can we proceed with regular agenda item 6B first?
Yes, I'm sorry, yes.
I would make a motion that we approve item 6B subject to final city attorney review and approval of the agreement.
And I'll second the motion.
Okay.
You want to Yes, please give us some background now that we're in discussion. We jumped the gun. We're excited.
It's okay. I am Larissa Philpott Brown, your Economic Development Director and the President and CEO of NEDCO, and I am thrilled to introduce Project Gateway to finally reveal that we have been working for many, many months with Eaton Cooper Power. It's a company that's existed in Nacogdoches for 50 years. They're celebrating their 50th anniversary. They've been a fantastic employer for Nacogdoches County for many years. They produce electrical voltage regulators. They are a global company with locations all over the world, the U.S. and Texas. They're proposing to add a 243,000 square foot addition to 2315 Southeast Stallings Drive. This would be $100 million in capital expenditures. They'll create over 200 new jobs. They will importantly retain their existing 385 jobs and provide an additional $14.7 million in payroll. That average salary would be about $67,000, which is fantastic for Nacogdoches County. That job increase will also induce, we've estimated through some economists, another 300 jobs in the community. So this type of economic output just continues to grow in the community. This roughly doubles the production of the facility. The 380 agreement before you does provide a 15-year tax rebate on a sliding scale. The structure is very similar to ones that the City Council has approved in the past. We are still waiting on attorney agreement on two very small pieces. So should you choose to approve this agreement, as you said, you're conditioning upon that final attorney review and approval. The County Commissioners court did just approve a 381 agreement very similarly at 9 a.m. this morning. And then also, you may not have seen yet, the governor announced a $1.962 million award from the Texas Enterprise Fund, which is a highly competitive program, and it must be agreed upon by the governor, the lieutenant governor, and the speaker of the House. I don't know the last time Nacogdoches County got one of those awards, or had a project of this size, so you can understand why we are so excited today. I've consistently said we in regards to this project because this has been a massive undertaking by many, many people in the community. I have to thank the county judge, our current mayor, as well as the former mayor, did a lot of work on this. You can see on that timeline up there that we started back in 2022 and worked all the way through the legislative session, even worked with some friends in Austin on some school district tax abatements that would benefit this project as well. So East Texas played a role in some statewide legislation that helps us economically. Also want to thank, of course, our NEDCO staff, the rest of the city staff, our city manager, Senator Nichols, for being so instrumental in that enterprise fund. The city and the county attorneys have worked very closely together, and Jose from the county attorney's office is here today. This is a win not only for NEDCO, but for the city, the county, and the region of Deep East Texas. We just are so very, very excited. We do have representatives from Eaton here today, and I would love to invite them up to say hello and just give you more information about them.
Good morning. So I'm Guillaume Laure, and I'm in charge of the transformers and voltage regulators business for Eaton, based in Waukesha, Wisconsin. This terrible accent is from France, so mind what I'm going to say. So really appreciate your time and listening to our needs in terms of this. Been very happy to be in this more than 50 years with a strong presence, strong employees base, and we've been very successful producing single-phase transformers, basically those equipment that power your home and businesses. And now we're facing an unprecedented demand fueled by the energy transition that the country is going through, as well as a lot of data centers going up throughout the country. And our business is based in Waukesha, Wisconsin, with 2 plants, and as well here in Nacogdoches, Texas. So we've been challenged with doubling our capacity, doubling our output of voltage regulators and 3-phase transformers. And we definitely made the decision to invest in an existing plant where we've been very, very successful over the years, built up strong relationship with the community, and really happy to be here in front of you today, and decided to invest over $100 million in this addition to, again, support the needs from the utilities around the country as well as data centers. So thank you for your time. Thank you for the longevity of the relationship. We're here to stay. And again, we're going to add 200 employees. We're going to continue to add employees up in Wisconsin, so we are growing. So we are very happy to be in this position today. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Merci beaucoup.
Oh, very nice. And thanks to everyone who has been working actively on this project.
Public comment? Since I
Is there any
jumped the
public
gun.
comment? Okay, all right, we have a motion and a second. All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? Same sign. Motion carries unanimously. Bravo. To everybody.
And a quick announcement to our friends
Sure.
from Eaton, if anyone, I think the media did want to do some interviews, and so if you do not want to enjoy the rest of this council meeting.
It's just budget.
Well, I'm sure it's very
Yeah,
interesting.
yeah. That's why we moved you up. You don't want to hear this.
Nice to meet you all.
Thank you very much. Yes,
Mayor,
sir.
if I may, I just
Yes.
want to echo the congratulations to Eaton. Thank you for being such great partners to our community. 50
Absolutely.
years, and we intend to continue that relationship. Thank you to Larissa Philpott Brown for all the work she did, our interim city manager, Keith Kiplinger, and all the staff that had a part of that. Just thank you so much. This is a huge deal for Nacogdoches, and we're so grateful for all of you.
We've been here 300 years, and we're here to stay too.
Forward to doubling again
Yeah.
in a few years.
Have a great day.
Thank you very much. Thank you so much. You too. Bye-bye.
Sorry about that. I jumped the gun a little. I was excited.
Excited. Okay. All right, now, we're gonna go back to, item A on the, regular agenda, presentation of the proposed 2023-2024 budget and calculated property tax rates. Ms. Pam.
Good morning. It's odd to say that.
It is.
So today, we are going to take a kind of a high overview look at the proposed budget, and then we're gonna discuss a little bit about the property tax rates that we did receive finally, so that was a welcome welcome addition. So just a little bit of background on the property tax changes that happened several years ago. The state passed Senate Bill 2 back in, gosh, I don't know if it was 2020 maybe, that limited the increase in the M&O tax rate from the prior 8% to the current 3.5%. And so that limits what we can do without going to the voters on the M&O side. Now, the debt side is completely separate, and so once you start issuing debt, those rates are not controlled by the changes of Senate Bill 2. Of course, we have new terminology, and I keep saying new because I still hear people say effective tax rate. What used to be the effective tax rate is now what we call the no new revenue rate, and that basically just means that they set a rate that will bring in the same revenue that the prior year. So if appraisals go up, the rates go down in order to bring in the same revenue, and so that's what the no new revenue rate is. And then the voter approval rate, of course, is exactly what it says. That's the rate at which we have to go to the voters to increase anything over that rate. Another addition would be the increment rate, and so what this does, it builds in a little bit of a buffer. The 3.5% is not a hard 3.5%. What we can do for 3 years, they will allow us to take the difference between the voter approval rate and the rate that we actually adopted, and whatever we didn't increase, we can keep and bank that for a future year. So let's say we go 3 years and we never get anywhere close to the voter approval rate, and we've banked 3 years worth of a little bit of increment, and then something happens in year 3 and we need significant revenue increases. 3.5 is all by law we can do, except now we have that increment. So just as an example, this year, our voter approval rate is about 7% over what the no new revenue rate is. So we've banked because we haven't used a lot of that over the last couple of years. So if we needed to increase taxes, we could go up to 7% this year, and that just rolls off every year. So you can take a rolling 3-year average of that increment. And that was left in there specifically for times that cities come across something that's rather significant that they need to fund, and understanding that 3.5% is not very much. And so that was a little bit of a fail-safe that the legislature left in there for us. And also, this will be the first year that the tax ceilings that were adopted last year will come into play with our tax calculations. And so you'll notice in your budget that the first page, the tax rate calculation page, looks a little bit different. Because in the past, we would get our assessed value, our assessed taxable value, times the rate, and everything was easy. So it was 1 times 2 and you're good to go. Well, now what happens with that tax ceiling is we have to back out the value of those homesteads, calculate a tax rate, and then add back in the tax that they paid last year, because that's the year that it set the tax. So now you're going to see it's a little more complicated calculation. It's not just your taxable value times a rate. Now every year we're going to have to adjust whatever that tax ceiling tax is. First year is very easy because it's the value of those properties, which was about 230 million, I believe, times last year's tax rate. And so that was very easy to calculate. Now going forward, that will change a little bit because that is based on a homestead. So we're going to have people that turn 65 this year that will get the benefit of the tax ceiling next year. We're gonna have people that are over 65 that unfortunately passed away, and that property went to a child who's under 65, and that tax ceiling does not follow. And so there's gonna be constant changes, and so I say that to say, going forward, the tax rate calculation gets more and more complicated every year, just because of that tax ceiling implication. So that's, when you look at last year's budget and this year's budget, that is gonna be something you're gonna see a little bit different, and going forward, like I said, it's not as, easy as taking one number times a rate and getting your taxes. So, I think that was one of the issues with the delay on the tax calculations this year as well, because it was our first year with the tax ceiling. And so in conjunction with the software conversion and having some data issues, I think Jason just really needed to take some additional time to make sure that he got the numbers accurate and to us that way. So that's a little bit on the background on property taxes. So that gives us now our taxable assessed value at a little over 2.3 billion. Now that is all in. Keep in mind that $273 million of that is the over 65 and disabled value for that tax ceiling. So you have to back that out in order to actually calculate. This year, our new value was right at $7 million, which was very low for us. So that was very sad. That only generates us about $33,000 in additional revenue this year. On the heels of last year, we had 44 million because, of course, the sale of Memorial Hospital to the private industry brought that onto the tax rolls last year. So last year we had a pretty good new value. This year, unfortunately, it's rather low for us. Our prior year tax rate, of course, is 51.851 cents per $100 valuation. With the new calculations, the no new revenue rate is 47.445 cents per $100 valuation, and the voter approval rate is 50.604. And keep in mind, that is with that increment rate, so that is about a 7% increase over what the no new revenue rate is. That is very tongue twisting. So the budget that you're going to see today is based on that no new revenue rate. So there is no tax increase included in the current proposed budget. That brings in O&M revenue of a little over $10.8 million, and then our debt rate is $228,000. That is for the principal and interest on the fire ladder truck. That's the only debt that we have outstanding at the moment. And then, of course, it generates $33,000 in new revenue from that new value of a little less than $7 million. So what does this look like for an average homeowner? The average home value after exemptions increased this year from $118,000 to right at $124,000. And so when you calculate that times the no new revenue rate, that's about $590 of tax liability. Of course, we're proposing the same exact rate, so there's zero increase in annual tax liability that in the proposed budget, because we are proposing the exact same no new revenue rate. So that brings us to the general fund first. Operational revenues for the general fund are $29.5 million. That's up about $700,000 from last year's operational revenue budget. Most of that is in sales tax and interest. Of course, property taxes at the exact same level. You will notice if you compare property tax information in your current budget as in their proposed budget, that there are different there. The reason for that is when we prepare the budget every year, we get a certified value, certified estimate at July 25th from the appraisal district. That is not necessarily what is actually going to be the value at levy. And so what they have to do is they have to stay within 5%. So, because there's still property that's under review right now with the appraisal board. And so what they do is they take and they say, this is what we estimate your taxable value will be. That is always different. Thankfully, they have been very conservative in their estimates. And so, knock on wood, we have not had a year that the actual values that come in at levy are less than what they told us in July. So we always pick up a little bit of value there. And so that's exactly what happened last year. We picked up, I think about $20 million worth of value. So you'll notice that the actual revenue actually went up from last year's budget based on the actual estimates that were a little bit low, which is always a good thing. You don't want to build a budget based on estimates that are too high because then you don't have that revenue coming in, and that causes just terrible problems down the road. So here again, this percentage,
you-
yes.
I just have a couple little questions about before, and I'm thinking it's better to get them now
Sure.
before. So I was just curious about the over 65 homestead exemption. How much do you think that really impacted? Do you have a gauge on that? I'm just curious.
So that is part of the calculation. It is on that, if you'll look on the very first, I guess it's page 1. Well, it doesn't print here. So the $273 million worth of value, that is the taxable ceiling value. If you take that times the tax rate, that will tell you the current year, the 5181, it's about $1.3 million worth of taxes, okay? So if you want to take the difference between that value and the rate we're proposing, that would be the actual loss, if that makes sense. And I can calculate, I don't have a calculator, but I can get that for you.
I'd like to gauge.
As you go forward, that's when it kind of becomes an issue. Right now, it's not gonna be an issue because we're proposing no new revenue rate. So it's the same rate. So their taxes last year will be their taxes this year. So there's no implication as long as you don't raise taxes. When you raise taxes, that's when you see that loss. Right now, with the no new revenue proposed, their taxes stay the same as will everybody else's, if that makes sense.
Right. And then also, when somebody sells or they die, it doesn't make any difference if it's to somebody over 65, that it changes at that point.
At that point, yes, when that sale or that.
Then it starts again.
And then it starts over. Now, the new person, if they come in, the new purchase is over 75, over 65, that kicks in as well.
But it
As long as
freezes
it's a
at that
homestead,
point. It freezes at their point.
at that point, yes.
Okay, I just wanted to clarify both those things. Thank you.
Okay, so as far as percentage of revenues, this is very similar to the way we have been split for as long as I can remember. 37% of our revenues come from property taxes, 27% from sales taxes, 8% from franchise fees, 20% from interfund transfers, and then everything else, which is recreation fees and court fines and all that stuff, is about 8%. So as you note, the majority of general fund is supported by tax and franchise fees. So when looking
Let me
at the
ask you this, Pam. How much, and I think I know the answer to this, how much would that 1 cent add to that sales tax that we're giving away?
Say that one more time.
How much would that 1 penny in sales
Okay,
tax
so-
add to that we're giving away?
So our sales tax projections is based on our 1 cent, that
Right.
8 million.
That's
So
right.
if we had another, it would be another 8
16
million.
million, okay, which would raise that probably to about 35%.
Yeah, it would
It's a
be
lot of
very,
money.
very, yeah, it's a lot of money.
Yeah.
Lots of money. So looking at general fund expenditures, and we're going to look at it 2 different ways. We're going to look by function, which is the type of department, and then we're also going to look at it by classification of the expenditure. So by department, 60% of the budget goes to public safety, 23% to general government, which is finance, IT, city manager, city council, those types of departments. Cultural and your recreational will be parks, recs, historic sites, those types, and highways, which would be the streets and the public works administration department. Then looking at it by classification, you'll see that about 77% of general fund expenditures are related to personnel costs. So this is salary, benefits, all-in cost is about 77% of the general fund budget. Followed by contractual services, that contains utilities, and then maintenance and supplies. So you'll see that as we move forward, the expenditures on the general fund, is one of the reasons that it causes such a tight budget is because it's related to personnel. So if something happens and revenues fall, there's nowhere to save significant amounts of money other than personnel. Now, we have been very blessed in the 26 years that I have been here that we have not gotten to the point where a lot of other cities were furloughing people and laying people off, and thankfully we've been able to work within freezing positions and doing those types of things when times did get bad. A lot of cities have not been as lucky, but it just kind of makes it very obvious that if you have to find hundreds of thousands of dollars during the year, you can't do that in your maintenance and supply budget that is only $100,000 general fund wide. And so there again, your people are your most important asset, and they are the most expensive. Oop, went too fast. All right, so we're going to talk about general fund capital expenditures a little bit. General fund capital, all of these expenditures are coming from reserves. None of these are operating expenditures. This is not any different than the budget that we talked about last week. All of those items are still here. There is detail in your budget document. IT, $175,000. It's made up of 7 or 8 servers and softwares, and so you do have some detail. But for a PowerPoint, it's kind of hard to put it out there and actually see it. So this capital equipment, gym flooring, the gymnastics room. There's various equipment needed in the Parks Department, a new fire alarm system at City Hall, and then equipment for the Streets Department for a total of right at $700,000. As well as CIP items of around $1.5 million. We discussed a little bit last week about the roofs. They are still in the budget currently, utilizing reserves for that. That's something that we talked about. There may be other ways we want to do that, but for the time being, we have presented it as a use of reserves. As well as a couple of parks projects, one being the parking lot repaving that we do on an annual basis, as well as the replacement of the Temple Spray Station. And then the annual $250,000 street rehab that is mandated by ordinance. Before I jump to utility fund, is there any questions on the general fund budget? I mean, we can come back later too, but if there's anything now, we can stop. Nope, okay.
I'm gonna have questions.
No, you're fine.
those.
So, chugging ahead, utility fund. This is very, very much similar to the current year. Water and sewer revenues do not change significantly here. Our annual usage is relatively static. We did have a little bit of a reduction in sewer charges this year. I have been hesitant to reduce that revenue budget the last couple of years. But we just have not picked back up. And a part of it is a couple of our big industries have changed the way they process. And so they're not as much going through the sewage system as they used to, because sewage, of course, is tied to their volume of water. And so as they make changes in their each of their industries, that does affect those sewer charges. We have not made budget in a couple of years on sewer, so I went ahead and broke down this year and reduced that revenue by a couple of $100,000 because we just haven't been bringing it in, and I don't want to continue hoping and relying on some money that's not coming. So this is very, very similar to what we see for the last probably 5 or 6 years. So on utility expenses. Here, I just want to call your attention to this because I know some of us haven't looked at this in a while. So on revenues, you'll see we have $20 million worth of revenues, but then when we start looking at expenditures, there's only 16.5, and that does not mean that we have $3.5–4 million sitting in profit. There is in the utility fund, governmental accounting has some quirks, I will call it. We cannot quantify certain things as an actual expense, although we funded, depreciation being one of those. That is not a operating expense per se for the utility fund, although we do transfer that money. So, we will have $20 million worth of uses for that money, and that's what it's called, other financing uses, in governmental accounting, because, you know, governmental accountants are a little bit weird. So, just looking at, let me go over here so I can give y'all some detail real quick. So, looking at these by classification, you'll see that in the utility fund, personnel services is only 20% of the budget, which is very, very different from what you see in the general fund. Of course, the general fund has your fire and police, your public safety, which has a large number of employees there. And so utility fund, several, you know, the number of departments is considerably less, but the number of employees as well. They have to do a lot of work with much fewer employees than the general fund does. So their piece of the pie is a little bit smaller. One thing that the sundry charges, so that always people don't, what is sundry? What does that mean? That's debt service. And so that is where you're going to see your principal and interest payments on any outstanding debt. And so we have some bonds that were issued in prior years for work on the water plant, the wastewater plant, and that we are still paying. And so that's what those sundry charges are debt service. And then, of course, the interfund transfers. These are the operating transfers as well as the franchise fees that the utility fund pays to the general fund. So looking at utility fund capital, here again, capital is budgeted out of the reserve accounts. We set aside the money for the depreciation every year. We fund 100% of depreciation, and that is how we purchase new equipment. As we buy it, we set it up for whatever useful life. We set aside that money, and at replacement time, then we have the money to replace this. And so there is cash in the bank to replace this. We got utility billing. They have the need for several vehicles. Last year, if you'll recall, we did not budget any vehicle replacements last year because we were having such a hard time getting them from the prior 2 years. And so we are playing catch up a little bit this year on vehicles. The water production department, as well as utility construction and wastewater. These are just equipment items. They are detailed in your budget. And then, of course, the CIP, which is in the very back of your budget. And this is going to be the water and sewer system improvements that are in the CIP. All of this, of course, is funded through cash reserves.
Would that be the COVID money?
No, that's completely separate.
Okay.
Yeah, we have that set aside in, it'll carry over. This is just new money. Okay. So the water piece of the ARPA money is in the budget currently, so it'll be part of the carryover. It won't be anything new. This is just new money.
We are going to spend it, though, aren't
We are going to spend it.
we? Good.
Plus.
Yeah.
So sanitation fund, here again, very similar to the history of the last 4 or 5 years. This is very consistent with the revenues that we are receiving, with the exception of interest, because of course the interest rate environment right now is just unheard of as to the last 4 or 5 years. But for the most part, the sanitation charges, the fuel charges, and the landfill gate receipts are all right where they should be. Keep in mind that a decade or so ago, we split out the fuel charges from the sanitation charges because fuel was going up so incredibly high, and we were not covering our cost. And so now every month when the diesel bill comes in, we calculate what that would be, and that is changing on your bill every month. So instead of being just a static number, it is actually tied to what diesel costs are. So if diesel goes up, your fee goes up. If diesel goes down, your fee go down. All right, on expenditures, sanitation fund, here again, personnel costs, 29%. Your maintenance, your supplies, your capital improvements, well, there's nothing in capital improvements, contractual services, and then your interfund transfers, here again, is your franchise fees and your operating transfers to the general fund. Proposed capital, we historically have tried to replace at least 2 garbage trucks annually. We have 2 out there now. that need to be replaced at $931,500. If you'll remember, a couple of meetings ago, we discussed the need that we may be coming to y'all with a budget amendment prior to the end of this year to go ahead and get those on order because the price is supposed to go up significantly after October. I wanted to go ahead and build this into the budget. If we do that budget amendment, of course, this would not be, this would be something that would be removed from the 23-24 budget. And then on the capital improvements, the CIP side, a few small things, Block P road repair, the downtown garbage sites that we have looked at doing, and then replacing a roof at the admin building. Keep in mind, there's still significant cost to the CIP that will carry over. I know we're doing a permit amendment and opening a new cell. Those things will carry over. So this is just new money that we're talking about this morning. Can't get used to that. So again, just items to note, the budget that is before you includes public safety's year 2 of the STEP plan that we implemented this past summer. It includes 3 police officer positions that had been previously frozen for the last, probably, looks like, I think 3 years. So this will be added back from those from prior to 2020. It does not include a COLA for employees. It does not include any additional employees that were requested. And it does include a decrease in the premium for base plan only for dependent health insurance. And so that was one of the things. We didn't make any other changes to the health plan. There were no increases, but we were able to do a nominal decrease for dependent coverage. So, oh yeah. We do need to talk a little bit about timeline. So on the original calendar, we were set to vote next week on the proposed tax rate. With the delay of the tax rates and the budget for a week, we have 2 options, so I kind of need to know where we want to go. If we are in agreement that the no new revenue rate is what we want to adopt, then we can go forward with the vote next Tuesday. It's not setting the rate, it sets what is proposed. So currently, the proposed rate is the no new revenue rate. So if we vote next week that the proposed rate is the no new revenue rate, then we can't raise it. Well, back up. We can, but we have to start the whole process over again. So we would have to have another set, we'd have to have, call a new meeting, vote again, reissue all of the advertisements, everything. We would have to literally start the process over. Now, we would have time if we did that before the end of August and still get the budget and the tax rate done by the end of September. It just becomes very, very, very important that we stay within our guidelines. Second option is if we are considering making any changes to that tax rate, then maybe we have a workshop next week. We don't vote on the tax rate. We call a special meeting for the next week to actually vote on that rate. So that gives us today and next week to make any changes to what we have proposed. So if the budget that we have presented is not the one that you want to stick with, and we want to make some changes, and those changes would require a change in the tax rate, then I would suggest we wait and vote on a special meeting on the 22nd or whatever day that week that we want. Those are the 2 options, because I just don't want y'all to vote next week and then lock yourselves into a rate and then come up the week after, want to have a budget workshop and say, well, we want to do this, this, and this, and then we can't because we've locked ourselves into a property tax rate that we can't increase without starting the process over. So that's kind of the direction I'm going to need today, whether we want to just push off the tax rate a week. It makes no difference on our legal deadlines. We are well within our timeline. If we want to wait and vote at a special called meeting the next week, that gives us another week and another budget workshop to discuss any changes. Completely up to council as to how we want to proceed with that.
Okay, let me ask you something, Pam. Okay, on this roof and air conditioners, okay, you're gonna have to know which way we need to go.
Before we set the tax rate.
Right.
Yeah.
Whether you wanna do a tax note or pay it all out of reserves.
Yeah.
What's your recommendation?
So,
Before you even give your I have some other thoughts I'd like to contribute to
Okay,
it too
go ahead.
before that. So, Mr. Bartlett has convinced me it's taken a year but you've done it, convinced me that we really do need to do the whole shebang. And especially now when things are only gonna get more costly. So, considering that, one of the things that I was looking at in the budget is, we really have to prioritize necessities over things that are just preferences. And there are some things that appear to be that we're spending out of the reserves that aren't necessities right now. So, so anything that's not a necessity out of reserves, and I know we have a few things in there that aren't, they're things that we'd like to have. If we took those out, and if we also looked at really the sales tax again, because I really do believe we can anticipate more sales tax. I mean, we were conservative on that, and we were conservative on what we might, get from property taxes too. I think if we cut down, maybe 400,000, we were talking about the things that aren't the necessities that we're using out of reserves, and I think we should fund it instead of borrowing money for the roofs. We have to fund the roofs. And if we readjusted the tax rate, took out the things that aren't necessities, we could fund that in this budget.
so that's two separate things, so make sure. So when you say take out the non-necessities, I need to know what you're talking about, because those, if they're the reserves things, they don't affect the tax rate at all. Because those are operational. So are you talking about capital equipment and capital CIP?
Yeah, some of it, you can pull up the reserve ones, I've got them in front of me. Anything that's like the tech sounds like it's absolutely a necessity, I imagine, to keep us safe and to have things working, correct?
Okay, so back to the capital equipment, is that what you're talking about?
Both,
Okay.
Obviously, the streets is, 250,000 of it is mandated, because that's part of it. But, even a parks equipment, the gym flooring,
So
we
just as
had
a background,
the spray station.
we had about $1.5 million, $2 million worth of capital equipment requested. This is when we went back to the departments and said, tier this based on what has to happen this year, what can wait till next year, and then what's a third year want. This is all tier one from the departments. These are the things that they said they need this year. So like the parks equipment, that 181,000, that was closer to 400,000 in the original request. These are the items that they have pared down and said, these are the things that we need this year. So if you want to look at detail.
At Maroney, baseball windscreen,
Right.
sports.
Those were the
books,
ones that
that's it.
were prioritized for current year.
Right, and I'm thinking that any of those, really, we could wait and actually see our income. We were talking about you didn't want to risk, if we didn't get the sales tax in, I would rather risk it on that rather than the roof.
So this is
and the air
reserves
conditioning.
utilization,
That's
so
right.
it's not tied to your operational revenues. This is just strictly use of reserves.
Correct, and we can't use them to repair the roof?
Yes,
Those-
but they're there. And so here's where I'm just going with this. So what I explained to y'all last week was we have the money to do all of this. What I don't want to do is to get our reserve over our 25% down so far that we are riding that 25%. Okay? We went back, worked through this, added this all up, put it in there, and actually, as of right now, with interest rates being what the money that we've pulled in this year, the reserve requirement, even if we spend all of this out of cash, is gonna be pretty similar to what it was estimated last year. Now, y'all know as well as I do that we always pull in a little bit more historically. We don't spend all of the operating expenditures. Sometimes the revenues come in higher. And so at this point, we have presented this as we're paying for them all out of reserves, and it still leaves us with 2.4 million over our 25% reserve requirement, which is exactly where we were last year.
Okay, so
And
we won't
so
have to borrow to
We
do
do
the
not
roof.
have to borrow. It was just an option if we need to.
So-
If you're comfortable with the 2.5 million over the 25%, no need. If you start looking and saying 4.5 months is not sufficient, I know when the auditors come in and they say, it looks really good when you have 5 and 6 months reserves. That's optimal. We're not gonna be there, but we are perfectly okay where we are.
So let me reiterate this or
Mm-hmm.
rephrase this. There are items here that we're spending out of reserve that are not essential. Now, they may be great, I mean, but they're not necessarily essential.
So
And I would put
I
those.
guess I don't,
I
in the
think I already
equipment,
said-
those have been prioritized by the department. Now, in the CIP, there's only, 4 or 5 projects, which this roof replacement, and Mr. Bartlett could speak to that, but I would assume that's pretty essential. We have to keep the street rehab, this roof, that only leaves the Temple spray station, replacement. The current one is completely not usable.
But that isn't essential right now, and then we can see and
That's
add it back.
that's a council
next
decision.
year.
If
Yeah.
if that's the way you don't wanna replace it right now, that is definitely at your disposal to remove that.
If our choices are to borrow money or to risk that we may not have enough, that's something that we can
Sure,
choose next year.
sure,
I'm not saying
sure.
don't do it, let's just put it off. And
but
some of
like I
those
said,
other smaller ones.
As long as 4.5 months worth of reserves is sufficient for council, then we're
build
good.
up- I would increase our reserves and put some of those projects just, and just look at it. We're just talking a few months and see if we're bringing in the sales tax and then, but I'd keep our reserves and just put those.
We
That's
we
my
can do whatever we want,
thoughts on it.
whatever council wants to do, we can make any of those changes as needed.
Yeah, but I have the issue of the statement, a few months, then another few months, and these projects just keep pitching out, and that's the way it's been in the past. What's not essential to some of us is essential to others. I mean, looking at the projects on the general fund proposed capital expenditures, I don't have a problem with all of those being funded. And I get a lot of feedback, especially about parks, equipment, and the gym floor. And I mean, we have a lot of young people that come and participate in activities at the library and the gym. Participating in the gym gets them to the library. So we need to fund those projects. That's just my opinion.
So, Ms. Kerbo, just thinking on the lines of where have we been historically as far as general fund reserves? I know now we're at, 4 to 5 months. That's where we started this year. We're gonna end the year almost in exactly the same place. We spent a lot of money out of reserves this year,
Yes, we did.
right? And we still end
A
up
lot.
in almost the same place.
Almost the same place. So this is, I think, my 11th budget, and we've had a couple of years that we've never dropped below our 25% reserve, but we had one year that we were only $600,000 estimated above that. And so we had very little cushion room. 2.4 million is probably one of the higher years that we've had. That was what we were estimated last year. Of course, we brought in considerably more than that because we are bringing in, instead of $30,000 worth of interest income, we brought in $300,000 worth of interest income. Now, that is fleeting. We've already gotten, some indications that the feds are gonna start coming down on the interest rates in 2024. When in 2024, I don't know. Is it gonna be before September? Is it gonna be after? Not sure. So we were pretty conservative with interest there, even though we left it considerably higher than what we were, looking at 2 and 3 years ago before these interest rate hikes. So at this point, 2.4 million over our 25% reserve requirement, I can stand and say I am fully okay with that because we have been in much worse shape than that. And you are correct. We spent a lot out of reserves this year. We had lots of budget amendments this year. We implemented a lot of things this year that in the middle of the year, that impacted that. And still, we were able to add to, reserves. And so at this point, we can prolong and move things if we need to. At the end of the day, the estimates show that we're gonna be in a good spot. Just because we budget this today doesn't mean we're gonna spend the money on October 1. Anything over $50,000 has to come back to y'all for approval anyway. So let's just say it's March and we're getting ready to do the spray station or the gymnastics floor, and we come to y'all and say, at that point, y'all can say, you know what, revenues are not where we are, we've took a big hit, our reserves are down, and then we don't. And so the budget, of course, is a plan. That's what we plan to do next year. Doesn't mean that we have to do it, because we're gonna come back to y'all. We may get a bid that the spray station is $400,000. We're gonna come back and say, and we're gonna, you know what, we're gonna have to put that off. And so just because we're planning for it doesn't mean we're going to have to go forward with it. I am perfectly okay with us budgeting for it and then seeing what happens in the future, because we are not in a situation on the reserve side that would warrant us not proceeding with something that we know we want and need for the community.
That makes good sense, so.
So, for clarity, the roof and HVAC projects are included
Yes.
100%. It
100%.
replaces the entire building in this budget.
Yes.
Okay.
And we're not borrowing to do it.
Yes, yes.
And is this a balanced budget?
Yes, now operationally, it is balanced. Operational revenues and operational expenses are balanced to the dollar.
Right.
Anything that's out of reserves, so it is structurally balanced, is what we call it in governmental accounting, structurally balanced. We are using reserves, but operating revenues and operating expenditures for the general fund are in balance.
So I want to step back to sales tax for a minute, and I appreciate the work you've done over the last long decades of doing this. I've gone back and pulled the sales tax, so you didn't have to do that for me. And I know we've always been conservative on it, and we always bring in more money than we expected. One of the issues, this is, I guess, not a question, as far as comfort is concerned, if the council decided, could we move higher on our projected revenue for sales tax? So in that way, pulling the data, year over year, we've never had a decrease in sales tax revenue, okay? Over the last decade, our average increase year over year is 4.5%. Our lowest increase was 2.2%, and last year it was 5.5%, which was huge increase. So in that way, what I'm thinking about is we've included no cost of living adjustments for our employees. And if we project our revenues more closely to what they will actually be, we could provide a cost of living adjustment for our employees. If we did what happened last year, which is huge, I don't expect that to happen, that would be an increase of $734,000. If we did the lowest it's ever gone up, we would increase $462,000 to $8.5 million. So that's just my perspective. I think we could do it, and I'll take the heat for it.
I'm gonna tell you, I'm in business, and I would err on the side of caution with sales tax. I know you've got the historical data, but you don't know when there's gonna be another 9/11. You don't know when there's gonna be another pandemic.
That's true.
You don't have a clue.
So-
And when it comes, you know, it's gonna hit you right between the eyes, and there's nothing that you can do about it, especially tying it to someone's income. That's the only thing I'll caution you
Right.
about.
So, and that is why, because sales tax is such a huge piece of general fund revenue, and because we know that the huge piece of general fund expenditures is personnel, any fluctuations in that, which is the only one really that fluctuates significantly. Now, we know franchise does based on, the sales of the utility revenues, and it can fluctuate. property taxes is not gonna fluctuate. Whatever y'all set that rate, that's what we're going to collect as long as people are paying, and we collect about 99%. With sales tax fluctuations though, since 77% of your expenditures are personnel, when I come to you and say sales tax is down 10% this month and 9% last month and 8% the month before that, then it becomes March, we're gonna freeze positions first, okay? We're not gonna fill any positions. And then if it doesn't get any better, then we're gonna look at, who are we going to send home for a while? Thankfully, we have not done that. And so, with sales tax being that one fluctuating thing, that is the one place that we have been very, very conservative.
And
so
I would say continue to be that way, because anything that you have over and above that is a bonus that you can use. I'll give you an example. During COVID, in retail, and I don't care what retail business you were in, we were living supply chain shortages. The TV wasn't even talking about it until 6 months later. We were in the middle of it, so we were going, what are you talking about it now for? We've been dealing with this for 2 months. I'm just telling you, I'm not telling you not to do it, but I'm telling you, err on the side of caution on that.
But the reality is that in the pandemic, our sales tax revenues increased 5%.
Well, and I will tell you, and that was a whole thing, and we did a lot of research here, and y'all, I have preached this from this podium like I am a pastor. Nacogdoches is very odd because of our geographic separation from DFW or the Houston area. We are very isolated. We do not see the fluctuations that the rest of the state sees at the same time. So we don't see a lot of the swings. We don't have huge increases. We don't have huge decreases. We bounce like this. And so when COVID came along and the federal government was pouring money into people's pockets, our base here, we have a very steady, unfortunately low income base, and they don't see a lot of extra money. So when you have an extra $600 in your pocket this month, you know what? I wasn't able to buy tires last month. I'm gonna go buy tires. I got another $600 this month. I wasn't able to put an AC in my grandmother's living room. Let me go. And building supply stores, sales went through the roof during all that. It was because people had money to spend that they had not had before the pandemic. And so we saw a huge, across the state, 20 and 30% decreases in sales tax. We had 2 months, and the rest of the time we were up. So it was a very, very strange for us. Now, I will tell you, I wanted to share with you kind of where normally sales tax is just looked at what we've done and hope and bump it a little. This year, what we did was a little bit different because we don't know what to do, because it is a very odd time we're living in. So we have a software that we use that is complete. It's just got all of our history of buy down to the buy vendor of sales tax. And so what they did is they took the last 2 years, each of our monthly things, and they adjusted it for inflation. And so what they were trying to say is, we know we've been living in very high inflation. If inflation disappears tomorrow, here's the impact that you're going to see on your sales tax. Because cities across the state are dealing with this because they don't want to count on money that's not coming. And so they took their numbers and they were very hard. They were very hard on us. Their projections are very, very low. And I just didn't see us ever losing the amount of money that they thought we would lose. And so I took the same type of calculation that they did based on our actual history for the last two fiscal years, and then just reduced it by, for the most part, 8% has been our inflation. Sometimes it's 9, sometimes just over that time frame, and adjusted down 8. But then I added back 3% because I know we 4.5 and 5 and 2.2, but over historically, conservatively, I added 3% back. And that got us to $8,054,000 and a budget at $8 million. So that's where the number came from this year. So there's a little bit of science behind it. Does that mean that I think we're going to come in there? I hope not. I hope we come in a lot higher than that. Historically, we really are.
You don't have a crystal ball?
Yeah,
I do
but,
not have, everybody always asks me about my crystal ball. I do not.
but
Yes, Mr.
Pam,
Bolden, yes.
it's hard for me to back away from what Councilman Huckabee has stated.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, you know, you stated this was just a plan. But I've always done budgets when I was in the private industry as close as possible as we felt like the revenue was coming in.
Mm-hmm.
And I have a positive thought that we're going to have a good year as far as sales tax. I mean, you know, especially with a business that we just talked about earlier, the Gateway. I
Right.
just feel like this is going to be really a good year for Nacogdoches, especially in sales tax. And, you know, myself, I would like to lay out a budget as close as I thought possible that the sales tax was going to come in.
Sure. And I was gonna say that Chief Kiplinger and I talked a little bit before this, and you know, it's hard to look at it. I don't have a crystal ball, and it's hard to look into 3 months from now, much less 18 months from now, because that's what we're doing. We're looking at trying to figure out what's gonna happen over the long haul. And, you know, although we've all gotten used to paying higher prices for everything, I still hope at some point that we go back to normal, but he did say, I mean, it's very possible that the prices that we're paying for a gallon of milk today are always gonna be the prices that we pay for a gallon of milk. And so, is there gonna be a market correction that's significant enough to get us back to what we used to pay for things? Probably not.
So
I have no scientific background to make that assumption, so if that's the case, we won't lose the 8% or the 5%. And so, yes, we could stand to bump that number. Am I comfortable saying it's gonna be 8.5 when it was 8.5 this year, that it's gonna be 8.5 next year? Probably not. Because at some point, you're gonna have some months that you always have some months that come in at a decrease.
So the bigger question is, if we do want to give some kind of cost of living increase, particularly to those who are paid in the lowest, I forget, what are they called? You have
Our pay grades.
Grades.
the pay grades, the lowest pay grades, because we've already got the step increases. And so, how much would that cost if we did at least a cost of living increase for the lowest pay grades?
So
That's the
only
big question,
for.
because you're looking at the income to pay for it. Yeah,
So I will
some
tell
kind
you,
of
one of our
adjustment.
original thoughts when we started this process was to look at, actually, you know, Mr. Bolden, you'll probably remember 2-3 years ago, we started the process of trying to raise our minimum wage, and we bumped it a couple of times. This year, last year, we didn't do that because it created so much compression that you would have your laborers and your equipment operators all making the same thing.
That's right.
And so,
Supervisors were-
right.
right.
And
I remember
so
that.
what we looked at this year was to take all of our pay grades below, I think, grade 23, because there was a break, there was no positions in that pay grade, which is equivalent to about $45,000 base salary, somewhere in there.
Okay.
Every one of those moving up a grade. So that would raise our minimum wage from the current $13.14 to like $14.14. That's a 5% increase. Our pay grades are on 5% increments. Move everybody from pay grade 23 down up to 5% was around roughly, and I haven't looked at this in a couple of months, or a couple of weeks because of the lack of funding, it was around $400,000. Now, that got everybody below 23. What we were looking at above 23, which includes all of your public safety, and then everybody above that, was doing the 2 to 3% COLA, which was another $200,000. So in order to do all of that was about $600,000. So we can go back and look at it as instead of doing the whole pay grade move, the 5%, we can do a 1%, a 2%, a 3%, and we can calculate that for you.
So did public safety, did we take care of that last year when we instituted
So
the
they-
STEP program or
So,
the?
so there's
not?
two things. Fire and police did two separate things. So police, they do a 1% step per year. Fire does not. Fire is doing every
years.
5th year.
5 years.
Right, and so they don't see an increase until year 5 when they move up. And so, yes, but anybody that hit that, mark, the 5 years of service, they moved up. But in the police, everybody moved up 1%, and that is included in the budget. So you will see the 1% increase on the step. Now, that is not tied to anything COLA. So when I'm telling you what a COLA cost, a 1% COLA, that includes fire and police, because they are also eligible for COLA. That's outside of your step plan. That makes sense.
So instead of
Pam.
the 5%.
Yes.
No, I'm sorry, go ahead.
So instead of the 5%, if everybody got a 1% COLA, what would
If
that?
everybody does 1% in the general fund, it's $194,000.
Okay, makes sense.
Yes, Mr. Bolden?
You mentioned one other thing, market correction. According to the Business Journal, the price of the products and the services is going to be pretty much a standard because they invested in their employees with, additional funds and perks and et cetera. So they don't look at it as going to be a market correction as to where it's going to go lower, may go higher. So they don't see it as a market correction to lower prices and services. That was just a comment.
Sure.
And independently, I did ask a couple of people to look at, people who are much more adept at this than I am, who do this kind of thing a lot, and they came in at the conservative sales tax revenue to be $8,200,000. So that would exactly cover a 1% COLA.
I was sitting here and I had just written, I would say I would not be comfortable going above $8,250,000.
Yeah.
That would be pretty
That would
much
be
my,
exactly
where
the-
I would say I'm gonna be very nervous for us next year.
You were at 8, right?
I'm at 8 right now, and I would be okay with 8,250 without being too nervous. Y'all, I'm just gonna be
I'm not-
nervous because until I see things go.
I'm not advocating for
but-
$9 million. I know
Right,
that's
no,
not
I
realistic.
understand.
The range that they gave was 8.2 to 8.5,
Yeah.
and so I'm comfortable with the lowest end, and that would cover it.
So keep in mind that
if you
sales
had-
tax reports y'all get monthly. If we start seeing a decline,
Right.
it's not gonna take long before we realize that. We can internally make some changes if we need to, if we see that this is a issue.
Positions, and that would
I mean, we've done it in the
immediately do
past, and it hold one out instead of immediately filling positions, we re-justify. We've done all those things, and it has worked well for us in the past. But yes, I mean, I can definitely see adding a couple $100,000 to it. I'm not sure that I would feel comfortable saying we're going to bring in exactly, and let's hope we do. But another option is, let's say, mid-year, we have come in and we're still double-digit increases over sales tax every month, and we estimate we're gonna end the year at 9.2. If in mid-year, y'all want to decide that, hey, you know what, we could probably do another 1% COLA, or we could do whatever, we can always do that mid-year. We've done that in the past before as well.
It's always easier to talk about it when you have it than when you don't.
it. Yes, you're right.
And I'll tell you, and I know everybody's tired of me saying if, but I want this to get to the public. If you had that 1 cent back, this wouldn't even be in discussion right now. None whatsoever. None. So that's for the record. Is the press here?
So
I'm gonna say that a lot. I'm not,
Okay,
Gonna
so,
drop it.
so to make sure that I'm understanding direction, I can add $250,000 to sales tax revenue. Okay?
200 really covers the 194,
Well, I was gonna say, we can do either or,
whatever.
and then include a 1% COLA. And then mid-year, if we see sales taxes coming in and it's actually, we're gonna bust where we are now, then we can reconvene in some point in the
Yeah,
future and
we
discuss
can talk
more.
about that, because we may have other things breaking too. And
Always easier to
always.
talk about it when you got it.
I think
And
Chief
when you don't.
Kiplinger is nodding about the things breaking, because you see it all
Always
the time.
happens. Always happens.
Right.
Okay, so,
A little tiny part of your job, and, Mr. Bartlett's. And
let me go back to where I was.
so I
Okay.
have a couple other questions.
go ahead.
too. So, does Vexus, as vexing as it is, do they pay a franchise fee? I wasn't sure about these franchise fees, how they've gone down and what.
So.
Help me out with that. And are
Yeah,
they-
once they're up and running fully, I mean, I'm assuming they'll start their recording just like everybody else. The thing with franchises, and several years ago, the legislature split, the cable and the internet and the phone and all that stuff. And so now they're able to choose which of if they provide both services, they choose which one, the cable or the internet, which one is the higher, and they pay one now instead of both. And so we did start seeing some decreases there. But as we all know, people are cutting the cable cord, and they're not making as many sales, and so it's a flat percentage, and so it goes down. And so that's one of the reasons for all the streaming services, those lawsuits, all that stuff's been going on, is because cities across the country are losing the revenue from the cable, but they haven't picked up on the streaming side yet. And so that's part of that process. And of course, on gas and electricity, it depends on usage. Now, this year we had a wonderful year on gas because we had a huge third quarter payment, and so that was probably the highest year in gas franchises that we've had in quite a few years. That is tied to weather. One of those things too, very conservative, and I have no idea when we're gonna have another one of those years. And so we sometimes we pick up money on that, sometimes we lose it. Most of our other revenues, though, have been very flat, or like our municipal court revenues, it's very flat. We didn't budget an increase or decrease in that this year. Revenues in the smaller, like recreation center, we increased it a little bit, but there's corresponding expenditures to run that increases, so it really doesn't do any good to the bottom line. So, all right, so we will go back, add in the additional sales tax revenue and a 1% COLA across the board. Now, one other thing that we need to discuss, we'll come back to this, but keep in mind, we still need a decision on when we're actually gonna vote on the proposed tax rate, whether it's gonna be next Tuesday or the following week. So I wanna give you a little bit of background on some of those things that had been requested that are not included in here. Of course, the COLA, that has been kind of settled away, but this is the actual increase in the tax rate that it would take to fund these items. So if any of these are items, this is the new positions, or the assistant city manager, there's a parks.
Do you
Go ahead.
have it on your slide, or just?
Is it not? Can you not see it?
That's it.
Oh, I see.
Yeah,
Well,
so the new positions, they're down at the bottom,
I see
underneath the
what you're
column.
saying. Sorry, thank you.
Oh, no, you're good. So the assistant city manager is right at a penny. The parks, that's an additional laborer position. And the custodian is an additional position, full-time custodian. So those are the general fund positions that were requested new this year. And that is the tax rate increase if we want to add those positions. And so, they're not in the current budget. They're not in the proposed tax rate. What we would be voting on next week would not include these and would preclude us from adding them at a future date without starting over. So I know we had some discussions on these new positions. I had sent out some stuff yesterday on the justification for those. So at this point, it's either or. We either vote next week on the no new revenue and do any of these with property tax increases, or we wait a week and we discuss it again next week. Either way works for me. I just need to know what to prepare for next Tuesday, because the agenda is due at 5 o'clock today. Isn't that right, Rhonda?
I'm good with this without adding those new positions.
Okay.
I think that's where we need to be.
All right, so we will proceed with the vote on the tax rate next Tuesday at the no new revenue rate.
And that comes in at,
47,445.
47,445.
Okay,
Thank you so much for all your
Thank
hard
you.
Yes,
work,
thank you.
you're welcome.
Pam, this is
particularly with all of the
laid out real well.
challenges you've had.
It's been a pretty challenging year. I say that every year though, so.
Now, admittedly, this wasn't as challenging as last year.
In its own way, it was. In a whole different set of circumstances, but yes. Okay, so just as a reiteration, and y'all can take out that August 22nd, cause I had in there just in case. So we will have another workshop, then we'll vote on the tax rate. If y'all want more workshops, we have 2 more weeks. That would literally be to discuss capital reserves stuff. Or if you find something in there that you wanna discuss, revenue projections, whatever, anything else that we wanna discuss, I can be here any of those 2 weeks, so if we wanna call a meeting, that's fine. Otherwise, we will push forward with all of our legal notifications and go with the public hearing on the budget on the 5th and the tax rate on the 12th. I will tell you that by adopting the no new revenue rate, we don't have any of these public hearing requirements. Historically, the years that we do that, though, we have them anyway. Just because we want to give the public the opportunity to speak. It's not required by law now that we're gonna go with the no new revenue rate. But if y'all want to continue with what we've done in the past and keep having, it's better to have them and not need them than to need them and not have, you know what I'm saying? So, I will proceed with having both public hearing, even though we don't technically need the tax rate public hearing.
Now, are you talking about September 5th is
Now,
what you're
the
talking about?
one, the
Or
September 12th is the
September 12th.
tax rate, and we technically don't have to have a public hearing if we're doing, now we have to adopt it, but we don't have to have a public hearing. But historically, we've done it just to
Okay.
give the people the option of
No,
speaking.
I would rather be just transparent and just
And we'll
keep
go
it.
through the whole advertising, all that stuff, just like we were required to. Okay,
Thank you, Pam.
That's it.
very
Thank
much.
you.
Thank you so much.
Okay, next item on the agenda is receive a report, hold a discussion, and give staff direction regarding the details of a possible general obligation bond. Mr. Bartlett.
Afternoon, Steve Bartlett, Director of Public Works. I want to say before I start, I visited with several of you just individually. Thank you for your consideration in the COLA. We've got a lot of folks that are hurting and need it, and I just want to tell you thank you, because I think it's super important, especially at the levels we're talking about, so thank you. Last time we met, you asked to have an item on this agenda so we could have some discussion on our upcoming resolution that will be calling for a bond election in November. I think you've got a lot of the details, but I think Councilwoman Bellinger particularly, I think, wanted to address what the financing terms, if you will, or the bond terms would be. And that's a great discussion. So I thought I sent last night and realized this document is so dynamic, you just got it. I brought hard copies. Would anybody like a hard copy? Yeah.
Thank you, sir.
And when you get home, please throw these away because there will be a new one tomorrow, but so understand we're just in progress. So I thought I'd take just a moment and show you about the basic structure of these. These are an unusual resolution. This is, of course, was base document was drafted by our bond counsel. It's been worked on by a financial advisor, by Pam, myself, and a host of us have been working on getting these blanks filled in, including our new election coordinator at the county. So you'll still see a few blanks left in it. Financial advisor is working on filling those in today, and I hope by tomorrow, Pam and I kind of have this document flush with numbers. What I wanted to call your attention to in particular is one thing, and I put this in my email to you, is we don't actually set the period for the bonds until in the resolution or even at the election. We set it whenever you individually go out for different bond issuances. So we may say we want to do $2 million towards a street program, and you authorize that, and we can, at that point, we set that issuance up for a 20-year, a 15-year, or a 30-year. So the maximum allowed by law, if I'm stating this right, my understanding is 40 years. Pam and I talked yesterday, and we don't really think that we would like to propose that as a cap. So what this document currently has in it is the maximum allowed discussions, say 30 years, because we couldn't see promoting anything to you for financing more than 30. In the very back of the document, kind of in appendices, there's exhibits, which are voter information exhibits, and they are for each individual proposition. It's like, so if we did it on this return period, in this case, they show 20 years, what would the tax rate impact be? What would that be for a $100,000 house? You know, those kind of voter questions. That's what this appendices is. The reason we've got 20 years plugged in there, we might have some that are 15, y'all, we might have some that are 25, but that shows you on a relatively conservative bond cycle what those costs would be. And again, these are informational, because at the moment we sell the bonds is what the interest rate, you know, those things change up to the moment that we do it. So I guess we can have discussions on what you'd like to present in the resolution. Again, they're more like upper limits, they're more like suggested examples, but I can change and morph those numbers. So I put up for you here just some typical usable life. This is Steve's opinion, and I've kind of gotten some of this from staff members, help with staff members as well. But to give you some idea, at our airports, our pavements, y'all, in 15 years, we're gonna be fixing them at an airport. But our structures, if we build a new terminal building, I hope we're building it for 50 years, other than maybe putting some new carpet down and some things like that. Fire stations, the same kind of philosophy, we're building them for a 50-year life. But our sites typically need a little work, paving, parking lots, things like that. So you can see we kind of split. But after 20 years, we may be doing some paving in a fire station parking lot. Cemetery building, again, a structure for 50 years. Parks, our playgrounds, 8 to 10 years, we're really doing some serious rehab. So again, that's where you would say, hey, I don't want to finance that for 30 is kind of the philosophy. Restrooms, again, they're structures. I put a lower life on these because they get a lot of attention and they have to be very durable, which is why they cost so much, but I think they're still gonna probably have some love after about 20 years, and that's a guess on my part. Streets, you know, anything we do in streets, if it's a small residential street, y'all, it lasts longer than a main street, but in general, Case and I typically look at, we're in 15 years doing minor repairs. That's where we're sealing cracks and doing some patching and things. Followed by about 20, I'm standing in front of you to actually repave a street again. And so I think any of your street stuff is gonna be maybe a 20-year max life kind of thinking. And then lastly, sidewalks, because they are concrete and they're in a little bit lower impact area. Occasionally a garbage truck backs over them, I guess, but generally speaking, we're only in minor repair mode even after 20 years. They're pretty durable, and we're just kind of fixing cracks in the sidewalk kind of thing. So I thought this might give you some flavor of life. You can see 20 years is kind of leaking out of this document as a typical, normal, reasonable. Buildings, 25 would be a very reasonable thing. I think Keith and I talked yesterday, actually, even, I mean, we would love to have 15 years financing. We're all, you know, let's get it paid for type of philosophy, but I think we handle that case by case as we do it. So, and I hope that kind of answers some of your concerns. So this document, and you can interrupt me as I'm going here, this document basically has your preamble information, and then goes into a more lengthy discussion. And don't kind of be fooled by what we put in there. So this is bond counsel language that includes a whole plethora of everything, which gives us the flexibility. And I want to give you one example that maybe explains all of them. So in our streets section, where we will propose to you to just pave streets, we might have a drainage inlet with a broken top that we'd like to fix, and that contractor who's doing the street really needs to be the one to fix it. But that's probably kind of smells like storm drainage. But we've got it included as potential scope in streets. So understand these documents will read where we can do some things like that, or fix a broken curb on the street that's concrete work. So they're written more generically, even though specifically our projects will probably be bundled very much like we've all talked, you know. So we're not looking for a lot of latitude, but our bond counsel has warned me a dozen times, please keep this as general and generic as you can, because you may find a tiny need, and we don't want to be challenged by what you've written in here. So anyway, I'm happy to entertain any questions. Again, I think the usable life thing was kind of the discussion I think you wanted to hear. These bones will change a little bit, but I think you're seeing the foundational document, and I hope within a day or two, Pam and I have everything filled in and to you for review. We will meet next Tuesday, and we're kind of on the critical path. You know, we got by the 21st, we have to call the election, or we're not having an election. So.
Steve, the total package on this bond was what, $43.7 million?
Yeah, right under 44, yes,
Okay.
sir.
Again, I'm gonna say, if we had that 1% in sales tax that is thrown away to the hospital district, these bonds could be paid off in a little over 4 years,
Understood?
period.
So, there are two things. I hope that, and I think I emailed both of you, or that both of these documents can be uploaded into this meeting, I guess.
They will be.
As attachments, because people want to be able to see those. My only other question, and I really appreciate it, nice and clear, makes sense to me. I appreciated all the extra language in it, it did not scare me, it was very helpful. And I appreciate also attaching exactly how, or at this point, what the voting statement will look like, the voter information document. I think that's really, really helpful. My question is about the process of, and you can answer this next week, what can we and can we not do by law, and what can staff do and not do? So I hope you don't have to clarify today.
Right,
but
understood.
next week. And then also the use of the committee. I think it's very complicated. We have two city council persons who are new and were not able to recommend people to be on that committee. On the other hand, I don't like the thing where each person appoints it depending on what holes you've got in the committee, and I would appreciate it if maybe we could, you could go back to your committee, the committee chairs, and ask them if they can come with some kind of proposal that they can work individually with both the mayor and Mr. Mall to include people that they want to see, and then also maybe to trim, people from the committee who didn't participate as much, and
Okay.
come back with some kind of,
Just a recommendation for
yeah, some
committee
kind of
structure?
recommendation that they work with it. Because of the Open Meetings Act, we cannot sit down and talk together unless it's right here, and we don't want to talk about individual people.
Sure.
So I'd like to just throw that into the committee's lap, that they figure out a committee that would be helpful to move this forward. I think one of the suggestions somebody had was terms, somebody be on here 1 year, somebody be on 2 years, or whatever. I'd just like for them to come back next week with some kind of idea of who's going to move it forward and how. And again, let me reiterate, talking with both the mayor and with Mr. Mall, who did not have any
Sure.
opportunity last time.
Sure.
So,
And I don't think that committee would need to be near as big as
Yeah,
as it
right.
was before.
Well, and realize the committee's your committee, it's not mine, so the structuring and the size of it was really your call. And we started out with 21 members,
wasn't mine.
quickly went to understood.
It wasn't mine.
And so, it was a large committee, but as far as committees go. Now, it was successful, and I hope you feel that.
I do.
But there was a lot of extra energy that goes into a large committee. And so, good or bad, I feel confident where we went. Please realize, we intended two things. One is for this committee to reconvene in September. We still have a whole utilities discussion to happen. So there's a lot of education that has gone on with these members in this regard, so please remember that. We spent a lot of time getting here, so they have become very savvy in bonds and expenses, so. But I do, whatever we do, Councilwoman, I need to have this committee ready to help me in the forward. We've also thought we'd let the dust settle with all this bond and have an executive session, live discussion with our bond counsel, where he can tell you exactly, I'd say I'm doing the Pam thing right there, where he can tell you exactly what your limitations are. I think you're gonna find they're very, very limited in your discussions. I know he's kind of told staff basically, and we can say almost very little and go very little. So I will get that set up for you. Right-
Maybe after the next meeting, or
Sure, I mean,
whatever,
you've got a lot you're
whatever.
going through, so we'll just try to hit an
Okay.
exec session where you've got, because I think you might have 30 minutes with them to ask
Okay.
questions and kind of get that feedback.
Okay.
I've also been collecting some documents that I'll just keep sharing with you on typical examples of what you don't say, probably is what most of the documents
you.
are. So I don't know that the day after you pass this resolution, you have to be that armed, but I think very quickly, you need to know what you
I
can
would
and
like to
can't
be
say, yeah.
armed before.
So, well, I mean, I don't know that we
You've
can
not
get.
had open well, I guess you have had open records and
Well,
everything
again, we're,
else.
we're meeting Tuesday to do this, so it may
Right.
be hard to get you an
Okay,
exec
well,
session,
whatever.
but
Well, I'm
if-
just saying
if I'll do
maybe
immediately
after.
after that, we'll plan something, I think, with an exec session, so. And no, and you need that, and I want you to have that, so. Please.
So again, if you can figure out some kind of workable, maybe smaller, maybe, but they're the ones, I think, who could do that and propose it and think it through with
Plus,
you,
Yeah,
how to
as
work
far
with
as the
it.
revenue bonds, I mean, you could leave it, but sooner or later it needs to be pared down some. You know, the revenue bonds, if you wanna keep it like it is, it's fine with me. Whatever.
Again, I'm gonna follow, I'm gonna follow y'all's direction on that, I'm not gonna pull a committee change, I'll let you do that. But let me ask the chairs first.
Yeah.
Because actually, y'all, I'm certain there are some that may be tired and ready to move on, and there are some that may be anxious to join us, I don't know what that totals to.
And there may be some that don't want to participate in this part
Right.
that participated, but we do need to include whatever the
Sure.
other two new council.
Sure, well, I only irritated about a half a dozen of them, so
did.
I think.
Well, that's
the rest of them
surprising.
will stay, I
That's
think.
really-
so. We
You're on
actually,
your best behavior.
I was gonna say we bonded well, but that's probably a joke we don't wanna do, so, but, no, so thank you, and thank you, it was a good committee, by the way. Very diverse in their thinking, and it was a very good committee, so we had lots of lively discussions, so. So any other questions I can answer for you, so, okay? We will be back next week with the real meal, and I will be sending you, we won't have it in Rhonda's packet by 5, most likely today, because by the time we get it and review it, so it'll be coming under separate cover to you, and we will also post that as well, so. I'm gonna just label this one big fat draft if I put it in today's meeting, and then, because it will be tweaked a little.
All over it
Yeah.
and watermark.
Thank you,
Okay,
Steve.
thank you all,
Thank you,
appreciate it.
Steve.
Any public comment? Okay, there being none, pursuant to Texas Government Code Section 551.074, and I'll go ahead and include 551.087, we will convene to executive session. 1:20 PM, and we're returning from executive session, and pursuant to Government Code 551.087, and also Government Code Section 551.074, no action. This meeting is adjourned. God bless the great city of Nacogdoches, Texas.